Hi, my name is Ken Walsleben. I'm a professor of entrepreneurial practice at the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse University. And I prepared this video to help those of you who might be looking at incremental alternative forms of funding and who might be in the market, if you will, to try and consume services from someone in that industry, and you're wondering how best to find an alternative solution to your need. So I've titled this presentation, What to Do When the Bank Says No, or Now What? And what I want to do is kind of share with you guys some of my personal experiences, because prior to being a professor, I was a practitioner in this space. I was a businessman who built an alternative finance company in the invoice factoring space and did so for 20 years, over 20 years. And in that process, was able to help literally 1,000 or more small and mid-sized businesses gain funding through our services. So I feel pretty well qualified to speak about all this. I've worked previously at a bank. I've also been, an industry veteran, so to speak, in the alternative finance space. So let's kind of dig into this subject and try and understand what some of your options might be if the bank says no. So let's understand some common mistakes that I've seen across the world of entrepreneurship through entrepreneurs, small and large. A common mistake tends to be that there's no strategy to their financial approach. It's basically a pile of band-aids on top of one another. Who had money for me today? I took that money and I just ran with it. And then somebody else had some money and I took that money. And yeah, you end up with this patchwork quilt of a mess that oftentimes backs you as the borrower into a corner where you as a businessman or woman can't get through the day-to-day because you've kind of boxed yourself in with all the different poorly thought through decisions that you've made up to that point. So I urge you to be proactive. I urge you not to be reactive. I need you to think about strategy. And after the benefit of this video, hopefully you'll have a better handle on how to strategize, how you'd approach your needs. Because there is more to life than just going to your corner bank and hoping they'll give you money. We'll be able to examine alternative forms of finance and equity and different types of debt. And I'll open your eyes to things you probably had no idea existed in the past. One of the other things that I find oftentimes is emblematic of poorly thought through strategies is that entrepreneurs will tend to shotgun their needs to all sorts of different funders. They'll send packages out to mortgage lenders. So a mortgage lender isn't going to be able to help you. But you need to be targeted in terms of who you're working with. You need to understand their specific motivations so that you can target your approach to their motivations. One of the biggest things I find is that the entrepreneur doesn't have a good handle on their financials. Now, this isn't to say you need to be an accountant. I'm not saying that at all. But you need to know what your accountant is telling you. You need to know what your financials are telling you. If you don't understand your economic model well, if you don't have a business plan thought through, if not on paper, at least in mind, you're in trouble. Life in the entrepreneurial space is not about reactivity. It's about proactivity. So with that as background, let's kind of dig in here a little bit. Let's roll up some sleeves, because I got to tell you what we're going to cover today. It's not complicated, but you do need to understand the basic foundation of how this works. You need to understand the building blocks. So what are the basics? We're going to talk about bootstrapping. You probably know a little bit about that. I won't spend a whole lot of time on that, but it's worthy certainly of discussion. We're going to talk about debt. We're going to talk about different types of debt, different providers of funding that you might not even know exist. Some of those might include purchase order funders, asset-based lenders. Do you know any? How about factoring firms? What I did. Quite likely, you don't know specifically what these kind of operators do, and you don't know specifically where to go find them. You might have heard of equity financing, which is to say finding an investor, but you better understand what the word dilution means, because you're going to dilute your ownership if you do this. And while I'm not against it, I do question sometimes whether you did so at the optimal time. You want to dilute when your business is highly valued, because that way you don't have to dilute as much. And we'll kind of discuss some of the pros and cons of these different alternatives as we go. I promise you that I'm not here to shill for any type of financing. I am agnostic. I think all of it has value, all of it has its place, including bank financing. So I just want to kind of cover the landscape of things other than bank financing in general. And I want you to understand what you should expect along this journey, what you should expect in terms of alternatives and what to expect in terms of your preparation. So let's dig into bootstrapping briefly. As you guys know, it's to eliminate or reduce or delay the need for funding by bootstrapping. What's bootstrapping? It's finding ways to avoid the need for external financing. It's finding a way to get along without needing outside capital. Because oftentimes it's hard for us as new firms to gain financing, and it's exceptionally hard to find financing at agreeable terms. Now, when I say bootstrapping, I kind of want to give you some examples. Never buy new when you buy used. And you see many things here on the screen. I'll share with you a little ditty that a friend of mine once shared with me, and it's always kind of stuck in my mind. He explained bootstrapping this way. He said, never buy new when you can buy used. Never buy when you can lease. Never lease when you can rent. Never rent when you can borrow. Never borrow when you can steal. Now, I say that all tongue in cheek at the end there because I'm not advocating you go out and enter a life of theft. But the point is that you need to find creative ways to avoid spending your money. You need to find creative ways to acquire product and things that you need. So you see here on this screen, whether it's coordinating purchases with other companies, or you'd be surprised how few people think to get a deposit in advance on the time of order. For those of you that are selling your goods or services in the B2B environment where you're selling to other businesses, trust me, they already know you're small. They might be working with you because you're small, because they're incented to do so. Don't be afraid to say to them, hey, at time of order, I'd like 25% down. Stuff like that goes a long way to covering your nut to be able to perform on your needs and avoid outside financing. And you'd be surprised how many of your customers will not even blink an eye and just say, yeah, okay. It's not a big problem for them, but most people are either afraid to ask or don't even think to ask. You see other things here, sharing office space with other businesses. I did, and most do. And we all have to try and maintain strong personal credit because that does play a role in our future ability to get capital. So I want to turn the page now. We'll leave bootstrapping alone. I want to start to get into debt. And I once asked the class, who can define debt? And somebody in the back of the class yelled back, it's evil. And I will say to you that I disagree entirely. You see, if I can find somebody who can loan me money, loan me their money that I can use in my business, and all I have to do is pay them back and don't give them a piece of my company, I think that's a pretty cool thing. So let's talk about debt. And let's define it this way. It's funding that needs to be paid back on specific terms. Okay, so you're going to have a payment plan. There's going to be interest involved as well as principal. It's going to show up on your company's balance sheet as an obligation. It's going to depend on your credit personally and your business's credit. It's going to normally require collateral. And we did an entire section on collateral and the essential legal things that you need to know. So check out that video if you haven't already. But it normally will require collateral because collateral is kind of the building block of debt funding. But at the end of the day, lenders are concerned with your ability to repay through cash flow. They want to see that your company can afford the indebtedness, that your company has a realistic capability of repayment, because lenders work on smaller margins. If it's a bank, it's likely at the time that I'm recording this video, it's likely a single-digit rate of interest, of annual interest. Alternative financiers will be a bit higher, but still, none of them can afford to take significant loss. Because if they have to write off a whole bunch of principal, you can imagine how many other loans and advances they need to make in order to make up that loss when they're only getting single-digit interest from the next loan. The key here is that lenders are very risk averse as a community. This is not what they do. Risk is not where they make their living. That's left for the investment community. So now that we've kind of defined debt in general, let's understand where it lives. Make no mistake that the top of this list is you. You will need to put your own cash into the company. And notice I didn't say your last dime, but not every last dime and nickel needs to go in, but a meaningful amount of your own personal welfare needs to go into your business. And the reason I say that is that In order for you to work with any of these other people on this list, they need to know that you're committed. You see, there's an old lending approach. Lenders learn this trick from early on. And it's a simple question. It's a rhetorical question. And that is, if you don't feel comfortable enough to put your own cash into your business, why should I? Ladies and gentlemen, it's a kill shot if you're not putting your own capital in. It needs to be a meaningful amount. It doesn't need to be all of your money, but it needs to be enough that if you lose it, it would hurt. They want to see that level of commitment. Thereafter, we can get loans from friends and family and others. If you do that, let me remind you that you have an obligation to look after them. They are, after all, putting money in, not because they necessarily are great investors, but rather they believe in you. And as a consequence, you owe them the obligation of documenting what this transaction is. There's no handshake agreements on this sort of thing. If it's a loan, you need to provide them a promissory note that specifies what the terms and conditions are and whether there is any collateral that's pledged. But make no mistake, you owe them at least that for their commitment to and loyalty to you. We have traditional banks and credit unions. That's where everybody thinks about debt. We'll also touch base on SBA guaranteed loans, which enables banks and credit unions to lend money to us. We'll talk about asset-based lenders as a group. We'll talk about a little bit about internet lenders. I will enlighten you to something you likely have never heard of called a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution. And then, of course, there's plenty of hybrids and the like out there in the marketplace. We're not going to go into a deep dive in any one of these, but we are going to cover the landscape of each of these different categories. So let's start out with banks. Isn't that what you thought of when you thought of debt? We all go to the bank. Oftentimes, that's our first stop. I want to clarify to you that, as we talked about at the outset of this video, it may not be strategically smart. If that bank requires a full assignment of all of your collateral, it might not be the best place for you to go. On the other hand, what banks have available to them is the ability to put cash into your hands inexpensively. And they operate, legally, and there's no problems in that sense. But do understand that they're risk averse, and financing startups can be pretty risky. Even with the best of management, this is a high mortality zone, and banks know it, and they can't afford to take hits. And very few of us as small businesses emerging, or even mid-sized, have great balance sheets and low leverage and things that get the commercial banker all interested. So as a consequence, historically, they've had to say no to us. They've had to say no for the understandable and right reasons, but nonetheless have had to say no. That was until, of course, this SBA, Small Business Administration, came into being. Because the SBA figured out a way to break this logjam. The SBA will insure our loan coming from the bank. Now the banker's interested because they're trading your personal credit for that of Uncle Sam's. The SBA doesn't lend money directly. They ensure that there's proper lending through the bank community to you. They provide liquidity to the system. They will essentially say to the bank, we will guarantee that loan to Ken. And in the process, if Ken defaults, hey, bank, you can lean on us. That's a beautiful thing for the bank, and that enables the bank to be able to say yes to you. Do understand that most of the time, the SBA is very, very agreeable to modifications. For example, while the loan from the bank might initially be contemplating a full assignment of all of your collateral, the so-called blanket lien, do understand that if you push back on that and say to the bank, no, I don't want to give a blanket lien, I would like to keep accounts receivable and general intangibles free, the bank might initially say, well, no, the SBA would never allow that. Well, I assure you the SBA almost always does. The SBA is an extraordinarily flexible program, and they operate with very rapid response to the banks. So do know that they're out there standing behind the banks, and it's because of their presence that allows us to be able to do what we do. And know that the SBA will work with small transactions as well as large. They have literally done it with hundreds of billions of dollars in loans to over 1 million different businesses. So know that this exists. Know that it's likely going to stand behind whatever the bank might offer to you. But do know that it's one of many cards that you have to play. But let's say the bank and the SBA somehow, for whatever reasons, maybe you're in an industry that is not well favored. Maybe you're in an industry that has a cloudy future. Maybe your company had a loss last year, which sometimes is a kill shot for someone's underwriting. If the bank says no, where are we going? I want to introduce you guys now to asset-based lenders. These are lenders, as the name implies, asset-based. They care less about your cash flow. Not that they turn a blind eye to it, but they care less about it, but they really love hard assets. What kind of assets, you ask? Accounts receivable, inventory, purchase orders, equipment. You get the idea. If you've got a lot of this, even though maybe you don't have the best of credit, maybe there's a personal blemish on your personal credit, a recent divorce or some sort of thing, that might be a kill shot for a bank. These folks will oftentimes look past that if you've got good amounts of collateral to pledge. I also mentioned community development financial institutions, CDFIs. CDFIs are governed by the SBA. And get this now, they're funded by those same commercial banks that say no to you. And the CDFI's role is to say yes if they can. So follow this. In order to break log jams, in order to help with those businesses that the banks say no to, that the SBA would not normally underwrite, the SBA says to those same regional commercial banks, we want you to fund a local CDFI who's going to underwrite transactions that you say no to. You might be scratching your head, and to which I say, welcome to America. Nonetheless, this makes sense for us because we can work with CDFIs sometimes. Now, CDFIs are smaller than commercial banks. They are typically fewer in number. There might only be one or two in your geographic region. So how do you find them? You can go to sba.gov, key in through the search engine, look for community development financial institutions. It'll prompt you for zip code information, and it will provide you information on who your regional representative CDFI may be. That's a door worth knocking on. Now, they're going to structure the transaction as a loan, just like the bank would have. But a lot of times, even though you're in a disfavored industry, even though you might have had that recent divorce, even though there might be any number of different blemishes that cause the bank to say no, a lot of times the CDFI will say yes. Now, I mentioned asset-based lenders. One example is a factoring company. I was a factoring company. That's what I did for my 20 plus years of providing finance. Let me walk you through an example of how it works. Let's first kind of lay out the landscape. This is good only in a B2B environment. So this assumes that you, as a vendor, are selling your goods to another business. The account debtor is your customer, and then I, as the factor, down at the bottom of the screen. So the first order of business is that you sell your goods or service to your account debtor, and you see a little piece of paper in the video in the screen. That's an invoice, and you've invoiced for the nuts and bolts that you sent to your customer. That means the transaction has occurred. It's done. It's settled. Now you're simply waiting for payment. It might be 30 days, but most of the time it's going to be longer than that. And at some point, somewhere in there, you decide, you know what? I don't want to wait for my customer to find their checkbook. I need to get paid. I need to get paid now because I've got cash flow needs. You might have another order to fulfill. You might have a marketing campaign to take care of. You might have payroll needs. You might have tax obligations. You get the idea. You're business people. You know all the different places that your money goes. So you'll turn around to a factoring company and you'll send them a copy of your invoice. And you'll say, hey, the account debtor owes me $10,000 and I delivered 2 weeks ago and I want to get paid now. What can you do? Well, the factor will scrutinize the invoice, verify its authenticity, and will advance you money on 2 different occasions. The first advance is going to be for 80% of the invoice amount. So if the invoice was for $10,000, they're going to send you $8,000 digitally. It's going to be transferred into your account overnight. No checks in the mail. You now have 80% of your invoice, which likely covers all of your costs, maybe even a little bit of your profit. And all you're essentially doing is waiting on getting your profit dollars later. But now you've got that $8,000 to run your business with. And at the same time, we're going to tell your account debtor, your customer, that when they get around to finding their checkbook, to send the payment to me. So at some day in the future, I'm going to get that payment for $10,000. The first thing I'm going to do when I receive it is reimburse myself for the $8,000 that I already gave you. And I'm going to also, from the remaining $2,000, deduct my fee. Now, how does the fee work? The fee works, oops, sorry about that. The fee works just like interest. The quicker this transaction gets paid off, the lower the fee. The longer it takes, the higher the fee. Across my whole portfolio over 20 years, what was my average fee? It worked out to be about 3%. So if let's use that number. If my fee is 3% of $10,000, that's $300. That's my fee. That $300 I'm going to keep. So I'm going to keep out of that $10,000 check from the customer. I'm going to keep the first $8,000 I already gave you. And I'm going to keep a fee of $300. That leaves $1,700 left over, right? That's your money. That's a second payment. We call that in the industry, we call that the reserve payment. That's going to go to you in the form of a second payment. That occurs once I've been paid. So between payment one and payment two, you got 97 cents on the dollar, 9,700 bucks. You gave up $300 to do this. It's a cash flow tool. Few of you knew about. And it exists for businesses that might not otherwise be able to get traditional financing. So this is a way for you to manage your cash flow. Best yet, this really isn't debt. It doesn't show up on your balance sheet as indebtedness, and it's not dilutive, meaning I don't take a piece of your business either. These transactions self-satisfy. Once the account debtor pays, the satisfaction is, or the indebtedness is extinguished between you and I. So transactionally, this is simply a case where you're taking one asset called an invoice and turning it into another asset called cash. It might be a valid way for you to make a buck. Now, I mentioned I wasn't going to shill for anybody, and I'm not shilling for factoring, even though it is where my personal background is. But did you know that there's something called purchase order funders? A purchase order funder is a company that exists to help you perform on a purchase order. So let's say you get a big purchase order from Walmart, and the order exceeds your capabilities to fulfill it. You don't have that much in inventory. Okay. If the bank won't give you additional money, you can go to a purchase order funder who will join you in the transaction. They will advance you money so that you can fulfill the order, and they will charge a fee for every 30 days that your money is in use. Their money is in use by you. And that fee will typically be in the neighborhood of 3 to 5% per month. So think of it this way. If your order to Walmart is going to net you 40% margin, for example, and it's going to take you 90 days to fulfill it, between fulfillment and getting paid by Walmart, there's a 90-day period. And you've got to pay some financier 15 points. Well, that still leaves a whole lot of profit for you. Have you given up some of your profit to make this happen? Yes. Have you performed on your transaction with Walmart? Yes. Do you have a happy customer with Walmart? Yes. All because you were able to partner with an alternative financier that you probably didn't know about. So if the time ever comes that you need a purchase order funder, just simply look for that and Google that phrase and see what pops up. And you'll find that there's plenty of options out there. Now, let's put debt aside for a minute. Now let's talk about equity funding. Now, as you see on the screen here, now I have to introduce you to the word dilution, right? Because now, much like Shark Tank, for example, you're going to give up a piece of your business for some cash. This tends to be a pretty bitter pill for entrepreneurs to have to swallow, but make no mistake, it can be very valuable type of financing when properly used. Remember what I talked about on the first screen? Strategy, ladies and gentlemen. If this is part of your logical strategy, it can make great sense. However, you don't want to go passing the hat for equity investors just simply because you need yet another Band-Aid on top of the other Band-Aids. So let's understand what equity funding is. Like I said, it's kind of Shark Tank. It's cash today, you're going to give up some of your business ownership. Problem, however, is that business ownership is given up likely forever. And unlike debt, it doesn't require specific repayment. It's not going to be debt on your balance sheet. It actually helps your balance sheet because it's going to go down as additional capitalization. So ironically, this obligation, if you want to call it that, is really not an obligation. It's actually helping your balance sheet look better. But make no mistake, you're giving up a piece of your company and possibly, likely, voting rights as well. And it's forever. Is this more expensive than debt? Yes, normally it is. Um, yes, it is a key part of the financial puzzle as to how businesses get going. But make no mistake, this is not cheap money, because should you be successful, they will have their hands in your pocket forever. On the other hand, if you're not successful, you can walk away with no further obligation. So there's, like anything in life, there are pros and cons. So who's going to get equity funding for you? Well, those same friends, family, and others are there. And as I urged you before, I urge you again. If you have a debt transaction, document it. If you have an equity transaction, document it. It needs to be clear to your valued friends and family, the loyal parties who are working with you, that indeed they know what the deal is as well. You've heard about angel investors. We're going to talk about those. You've heard about venture capitalists. We're going to talk briefly about them as well. But I'm going to focus most of my time on angels because they're more likely to be the ones to help us as we're emerging businesses. What's an angel investor? They're going to be individuals. This is not their full-time preoccupation. This is not what they do for anything other than perhaps a hobby or to stay engaged in the business world. They're doing it for financial interest and financial return, make no mistake. But they're also doing it because they think they've got something to give back to a growing company, that they've been there, done that. They are likely going to be more senior, a little more silver in their hair. They're going to possibly be retired or semi-retired. They're going to be people with some decent income and wealth that have been accumulated over the years. They're going to be people who likely were successful as entrepreneurs themselves, and they're interested in staying in the game. Maybe they found retirement to be too limited. In any case, these are individuals who are using their own wallet, making their own decisions. And they can sometimes be kind of hard to find them. But they tend to work in dollar amounts of anywhere from 50,000 on up. It's very rare to find an individual willing to put $1 million into anything. But a lot of times they'll pair up or partner up with other angel investors. I personally funded my business with a group of 4 who collectively ponied up the money I needed for my business initially. So it's not unusual to see multiple angel investors, so long as they know that they can work together in a cooperative fashion. Where do we find them? As I mentioned to you a moment ago, they can be pretty hard to find. But we can find them by networking. And I say networking with your BAIL team. What's BAIL stand for? Bankers, accountants, insurance agents, and lawyers. So, as a word of general advice, if you're going to work with an accountant, be sure to work with one who's well networked and connected in the local community. You don't want to call your accountant up and say, "Hey, Ken, I've got a need for some financing. I need a few soft introductions to some investors. Do you know anybody?" If the answer comes back no, I humbly suggest that you chose the wrong accountant initially. You want to have people that are connected. The same goes for your banker and your lawyer too. These are people who can help you find angels, because there's no storefront that says angels are us. It almost always is a case that you've got to go find them by networking. Another trick of the trade that I've found is that most chambers of commerce around the country, in towns and cities of moderate size, most all of them keep an informal list of angel investors in their community. These are going to be probably retired business people who might have said to the chamber, "Hey, keep me in mind if you see a good opportunity. I might be able to invest and help somebody." So they'll keep an informal list in somebody's desk drawer of the number of people for you to contact. It's not going to be on the Chamber of Commerce's website. It's not open for public discussion. But do know that pose the question to your chamber and see what you can find out. These kinds of networking opportunities is where you're going to find potential angel investors. Now, make no mistake, angel investors know the harsh economic realities. They will reject most of the transactions that they've presented because they know that even if they judiciously look at everything and make as best decision as they can, they're still investing into a high mortality zone for businesses. They know that roughly 45% of their investments will fail outright. Another 40% are going to be living dead. What do I mean by that? They're just trending along, they're staying open, but they're not generating any of the expected income that was anticipated, and they're never going to be able to repay the investment. And then there's another small group that are the winners, and inevitably the winners and the money that they make from those investments will cover and make sense for the other ones that didn't pan out. Now, you need to understand motivations. Remember when we talked about lenders, and I explained to you they are risk averse. They're looking at ways to avoid loss. They're looking at your company's capability of repayment. In the investor world, completely different dynamic. These folks understand risk. They are not afraid of risk. They're willing to incur risk if they see greater chances for high return. They are betting on the future. They're betting on your promise, your company's potential. They're not concerned about your company's capability of repayment. They want to know what your company is capable of achieving. That's what spins their propeller. That's what keeps them in the game. So when you're talking about approaching different kinds of financiers, if you're approaching a debt lender, you're talking to them about risk aversion. You're talking to them about collateral. If you're talking to an investor, you're talking to them about upside. You're talking to them about potential and profits down the road. You're never talking to them about collateral. Don't ever do that. Now, those are angel investors. You might have heard the term venture capitalist. What's a venture capitalist? Well, I will define that differently. A venture capitalist is a business that does this for a living. They are, by their very nature, investors. This is what they do for a living. They are out there investing other people's capital, typically institutional capital, insurance fund money, universities, endowment funds, etc. They need to get good returns in the marketplace. Well, those funding sources will put some money into the stock market, but they'll also put some money into venture capital for outsized returns, assuming that the venture capital firm invests it well. Venture capital firms are savvy. They're smart. They also deal in big dollars. They rarely work with small emerging businesses. In fact, the smallest investment I've ever seen a venture capital firm make was $1 million. Instead, venture capital firms tend to be working in the 5 million and up range. And as a consequence, your firm has to be worthy of such an investment. Maybe you've got a company that is already doing $20 million a year in revenues, and if you could just get your hands on 5 million in investment, you could pop it to 50 million. That's where these guys come into play. That takes most of us who are startup firms out of the game. But also understand that venture capital firms are not just generalists. They're not going to fund industries across the landscape. They are specialists. What I mean by that is the venture capital firm might be really good at medical or high tech or transportation or manufacturing. And they understand that space, and they have great and deep knowledge in that space, and they will make investment decisions only if you are in that space. So if you need venture capital, don't go knocking on any given door. You need to do some research on the venture capital firms that are expert in your particular industry dynamic. So now that we understand a little bit in terms of different kinds of options that the bank says no, we've talked about different types of funders. We've talked about asset-based lenders. We've talked about CDFIs. We've talked about the SBA. We've talked about purchase order funders. We've talked about factoring firms. On the equity side of things, we've defined what an angel investor is. We've defined what a venture capitalist is. More importantly, we've also determined ways for you to go about finding them. Now let's talk about strategy, which is where I started our discussion. Let's understand that it's up to you as the entrepreneur to form your strategy. And a lot of times it's based on kind of the life stage of your firm. Now, please understand that with bullet number 3, this is not a hard and fast rule. You are in charge of your own strategy, and you can change any of this. But it is common. It is common for us to first find that the founder will put their own cash in, and then they'll bootstrap the heck out of their company for as long as they can, and then they'll find some friends and family money. And then they'll eventually grow. They'll get the business up and running. They'll prove it a little bit, but they need a way to pop it because they need some incremental capital, but they don't yet qualify for traditional bank lending. So they'll find an angel investor. And the angel investors investment will take off. And I should also mention, and I should have previously, work with an angel investor who can provide you great insight. Everyone's cash is green, but what separates one angel from another is how much they can help your firm. How deep is their network? How deep is their experience? How willing are they to engage with you and share with you their wisdom and insight? Nonetheless, you've got angel money in there, and that will grow your business to a certain level. And it might grow your business to a certain level of stability that will then enable you to go to a bank. And if it's not the bank, you might be able to go to one of the alternatives to banks. And you'll grow your business to a sizable amount. Now you're talking 20, 25 million in sales. And if you need additional capital, sometimes that's where you would then turn to that venture capital professional firm. Now, please understand that progression can be modified. There's no rule that says that's the way it needs to be, but that is a common way that things approach. The key here is that someone had the strategy to think about how they want to approach this. And as you see in bullets 4 and 5, you have to understand the motivations of whomever the funder might be, whoever your targeted funder is, and know that there can only be success if there is a commonality of interest. Your interests have to align. And I'll explain that this way. When I sat down with my angel investors to work out our deal, we had to hammer it out. One of their first questions to me was, Ken, how do you expect to make money in the business personally? And I explained how, and they said, well, that's great. How much do you want to make? And I explained, well, as much as I possibly can. And they said, okay, but for every dollar that you make, we want to have an additional dollar or a similar sort of approach. We want to know that as you grow well off, Ken, that we do too. We don't want to build a business that rewards Ken and not us. There has to be a commonality of approach so that all boats lift with the rising tide. Now, let's think about do's and don'ts. I'm going to apply 20 years of experience to you here and kind of give you a sense of what to and what not to do. Do maintain personal good credit. Do have a business plan with financials, projections. Do be strategic about your approach. Do understand the motivations of your funding. If you're going to get involved with an equity transaction, as you see in the red here, know how to value your business. Don't just go on to Shark Tank as these fools do and say, hey, I need $250,000 and I'll give up 10% of my company. They have no idea what their company is worth. You need to understand what your company is worth in order to make an appropriate approach to an angel investor. Know exactly what you need and on what terms. Is it debt? Is it equity? What are you prepared to offer? And understand what the motivations of your funder are and what the benefits and the strengths of your company are. Don't get discouraged. It is easy to get discouraged in the chase for funding. You'll hear far more no's, but you only need to hear one yes. At the same time, be judicious. Don't think, okay, I heard the one yes, I better get off my knees now and everybody's happy and I don't need to pray anymore. No, keep looking. Do be sure that you don't have a better deal elsewhere. Remember that whether it's debt or equity, that everybody's money is green. What separates the great fundings for the not so great is how much the funder can share with you, how much they can bring to the table. Even if it's a lender, how can you benefit from their knowledge? You need their brains and their connections. Don't forget your bail team. Understand that your business will continue to operate while you search. A lot of times, your searching efforts will result in the business's operations taking a back seat. Don't let that happen. You can't let your business flounder while you go out looking around for your next dollar. You have to figure out a way to keep everything rolling while you do so. And don't forget that it's up to you to make the offer. You can't just simply say to some investor, hey, investor, here's my company. What do you think of it? What would you give me? No, you want to go out there and say, I need to raise $200,000 and I'm prepared to do blank. Whatever that blank is, now that's the starting point for the conversation. So you need to lead with that. You might be wondering, whether it's debt or equity, what kinds of questions should you anticipate? What's in their mind? Because remember, I've sat on both sides of this table and I've sat on the table as an investor. I've sat on the table as a lender. I've sat on the table as a borrower. So let's understand where the questions are going to come from, what they care about. First off, whether it's debt or equity, they want to know about you, your management team, perhaps. What do you bring to the table? How capable are you? Do you really have the experience that we need? Are you a good operator? It has been said by many that I would sooner invest in a business that has a B quality idea, but has an A quality entrepreneur. If I have an A quality entrepreneur, I can make it work. The other way around, however, it doesn't matter how great your idea is. If you're a B quality entrepreneur, it's going to be very hard to find funding. People make their bet on you. You need to be able to develop your reputation, develop your image, develop your approach so that when you sit down with somebody, that they know you're a person of substance. They want to know who's around with you, what key employees are there, any current advisors or board members who have signed on with you. And as we pointed out earlier in this video, do you have skin in the game? Have you put your own cash in? Have you put in enough that I now know you're committed? The last thing I want to think about as a prospective investor is how are you really good? If I have to question that, you're not getting my money. Next thing to think about is your market. Make no mistake, whether it's debt or equity, they want to know where you make your living. What is going on in the market? What are the dynamics in the market? What is the latest? What's the competitive environment like? How sensitive are you to AI, for example, the buzzword of the day now? How sensitive are you to industry regulation from the government? What about the window of opportunity? Are you in too early or too late, or is it Cinderella time, or not Cinderella, but are you, it's a Goldilocks, I apologize. It's a Goldilocks time, kind of too, whereas it's not too early, it's not too late, it's just right. Apologies for the fairy tale references there. Bottom line is that they want to understand your market. They also want to understand how well you know your market. What about your product or your technology? Is it top notch? Is there a good runway? All right. Is your technology in danger of getting leapfrogged very quickly? Are you in an industry that is constantly being leapfrogged, in which case all you have is today's solution and tomorrow you're going to get run away? Does your product have viability across large customer swaths? Is there customer validation? Have you proven that customers want your product or your service? How are you going to deliver on it? Where will it be produced? Can you protect it? Do you have any intellectual property or patents? Get the idea? Whether I'm a lender, whether I'm an investor, I want to know that your product is sustainable in the marketplace. And if it requires evolution, what's that product roadmap look like? Then there's financing risk. Okay, so I want to understand the terms of the deal. What is it that you're proposing? Are you looking for debt or equity? How much do you need? Can you afford it? If it's equity, what are you offering? How do you value your business? How much are you looking to raise? Is this enough? One of the biggest surprises to you potentially is that most entrepreneurs don't ask for enough money. They try and hamstring it and oftentimes cause themselves fatal harm in the long run because they didn't get properly capitalized initially. So if I'm a savvy investor, I want to realize I'm not throwing good money after bad. I want to be sure that whatever you're asking for is enough and that there's cushion in the budget so that you're not going to come back to me in 6 months and say, oh my gosh, I need more. I want to know that you've thought through and that we've figured out that we're in the right place. How much additional funding do you anticipate needing? And if it's equity, what's that going to do? Can you come to me, or are we both going to get diluted? Get the idea. Most importantly, perhaps, whether it's debt or equity, how am I going to get out of this? If I'm a lender, I want to know that you can repay me. I want to know that I can get all my money back and that it's plausible and realistic. If I'm an equity investor, please understand, I want to be your equity investor and I want to be your friend forever, but I don't want to be your equity investor forever. I typically have about a 5-year window. You're going to use my money and I want to get it back. I want to get it back fivefold and I want to get it back in the next 5 years. So I know you want to get in my wallet, but have you really thought about how you're going to get me out of this? down the road. These are questions that you're going to need to be prepared for. You need to be prepared regardless of where you're putting your hat out for funding. And these are the kinds of questions, if you feel good about them, odds are much, much higher that you're going to be able to get financing either from the bank initially or from any one of these alternative approaches. So I wish you the very best of luck. This is not an easy journey. It's made easier, however, when you know the full landscape of alternatives. You understand what the motivations are of the different players. And frankly, if you understand the depth and breadth of that landscape, hopefully we've covered some things in here you weren't aware of as a potential user of funding. And hopefully we've helped to kind of clarify the path that you might someday choose. Make me just one promise, though. Be strategic. I wish you the very best of luck.